Hello, students. It's Mrs. Donahue with, again, the on-point makeup, but the quarantine hair. We're all there. So I've been looking through the exit ticket responses for Hayden White, and generally speaking, you guys aren't asking for a lot of information on New Historicism. You're expressing a lot of comfort with it, which is really good. I wanted to address one question that I saw, and I was like, it needs its own video. So someone said, in all seriousness, they wanted to know if Shakespeare was bisexual or in some way flamboyant, a la Richard II. So I posted a few different videos of Richard II, David Tennant, Ben Whishaw, both who do tremendous performances. And I've sort of indicated to you in some of the videos that they thought about sexuality very differently in that time period. So this fun little class conversation. I wouldn't say that Shakespeare was bisexual by our definition of such things. So you guys are coming to gender and sexuality through this massively different social experience than Shakespeare did. In this time, that the early modern period, which is like heading towards Renaissance, right? You're starting to see like revivalism of Greek and traditions and writings. Their education would have been heavily based in the Greek system. So they had something akin to a public education system in Shakespeare's time, and he did attend. They would have had to have been fluent in Latin in order to read the books. English was not the language of the educated. Latin was, French was, so you're looking at someone who's at the very least fluent in Latin, fluent in English, probably passable in French and Italian, and potentially can even get their way through some Greek. I mean, who among us has that kind of educational standard? I once tried to teach myself Latin for graduate school because I wanted to go medieval, like full medieval, as opposed to early modern. And that just didn't happen because Latin's rather difficult. Those of you who have taken Latin here at school with Mr. Denny probably know it's a language that is dead, so it's not continuing to be spoken, it's not evolving, but it's actually quite kind of tricky. I don't know, I find Latin tricky. The Romance languages are always kind of a fun experiment because English is Germanic, it's not Latinate. So we are used to a totally different set of rules than Latin is used to. As he's reading these, you have to understand that the Greek writing system and the Greek arts have this different kind of classical mindset on things. Like, I don't know how many of you have been exposed to Aristotle and stuff like that. The Greeks had an ideology that was based in like love and relationships and mental sort of connection to people being fairly both connected to and divorced from physical sexuality. So say you're a man, you get married to your wife. You don't expect that your wife is your best friend. You guys have a modern expectation that in a relationship, you should be in a relationship with your best friend. That the person you're with is a true partner, they're an equal, they're someone you turn to, they're your number one that you turn to. Like if you have someone above your spouse, it's weird. In Shakespeare's time and in the Greek times, they had an expectation that men and women, and this is both heavily misogynist and not, had such different expectations about their own lives that there was no way for them to be equal. So it's not like men necessarily were like, women, these things. A lot of men respected their women heartily. It's just that they understood the women's roles in life to be a lot different than the men's. And how is a man supposed to sit down and talk to his wife about his manly tasks when she has absolutely no idea what it's like to do those? And how is she supposed to talk to him about her womanly tasks when he has absolutely no idea how to do those? Like if 80 to 90% of your day is spent doing totally different contradictory activities, how are you meant to come together and converse about that? That's sort of the key struggle there. So in the ancient Greek time, and then again, this is referential to Shakespeare, you would have seen people having their marital relationships, which obviously are breeding based. Right through the Renaissance time period, we're very concerned with making more people. We want more people, especially post Black Death. So post medieval Black Death, the world's like, we got to make more babies. Like, we have a really opportunity here to get back what we lost. We need more babies. And you have to remember that infant mortality is fairly high. So they're very obsessed with the idea of making more babies, which is something that we've kind of let go of. We're not quite as baby obsessed. I mean, everyone loves a baby. Killian's not here right now. I'd show him to you if he was. But everyone loves a baby. We're not nearly to the place where we're like, we need to make more people. There's a problem. They were. You have the idea that your marriage is designed, because again, they would purposely pick their spouses to better the family lines, usually of both families, so that these are marriages that promote your children. You get married to someone knowing that you're going to procreate, knowing that this is going to create a better situation for your children. So it's very decisive. A lot of these are not what you would consider lovey-dovey marriages. They're marriages that start like a business arrangement. A lot of them then came to love one another, but they wouldn't normally start from a place of love. They would build to it over time. Actually, statistically speaking, in modern countries that have arranged marriages, there are significantly lower divorce rates in them. It's an interesting concept. I have not yet watched some of the TLC shows about Married at First Sight and stuff on my quarantine, but there's an idea of fascination behind, should we really follow our own hearts? Our hearts sometimes get us in trouble because we have a tendency to forgive really bad qualities in those we love desperately. Think of toxic relationships that you might have lingered too long, and you guys are kind of young for that, but inevitably one or two of you will have stumbled upon it already. It's hard sometimes when you follow your heart to then get all the practical matters of living and raising a family with someone settled. We find that frequently we are encountering divorce in modern culture because of things that we call irreconcilable differences. I want A and you want B, and there's really no between on that. In the older cultures, you didn't see this as much because those things were all sort of negotiated up front. Anyway, back to Shakespeare and his education. He's reading all of these classical Greek figures, and Greek figures would have seen nothing wrong with male-on-male relationships or female-on-female relationships, even those with great age divides. So you would have seen older men with younger boys, sometimes in a creepy way and sometimes not in a creepy way. You would have seen men maybe in their 40s with lovers in their 20s and sometimes younger. There came to be a time in bits of the Renaissance where you would almost be accused of being Greek to be accused of homosexuality. So once the Greeks sort of are no longer the most prominent, right? Once we sort of go to a Christian-focused social structure, this shifts. We see a major shift once we lose that Greek-Roman sort of central society. And instead what we get is we see sodomy becoming a sin. So there becomes a focus on this behavior being bad. Now, believe it or not, despite the fact that everyone's sort of falling under the Christian umbrella in Shakespeare's time, remember that there's been decades of religious unrest from Henry VIII straight through all of his children, and Elizabeth was sort of riding that bucking bronco the entire time that she was queen, and James I is still dealing with it because he's yet another type of religion coming in from Scotland where there was tension with England. So do you see people necessarily cracking the whip on religious culture in England? You have a lot of people, Elizabeth and James at the height of that, really trying to calm people from becoming too religiously zealous with one another because it created too many political problems. So in other words, are you allowing sort of Christian policing of behavior? You're trying to limit it because you don't want the Catholics and the Protestants getting at each other's throats. Maybe they would agree on certain things, but you don't want to introduce religious policing in the country of England while Shakespeare's kind of coming up, because there's been so much unrest. We discussed Bloody Mary and her sort of really great give off to her brother and sister. And if you need a 30-second refresher, Henry VIII, in order to sort of marry whoever he wanted in his attempt to produce a male heir, created his own religion and broke off with the Catholic Church. So then you had a really weird situation where you have Catholics and then you have the Protestants, and they're all living in England and they're all vying for being the number one religion of the state. And inevitably this comes down to where the money goes, because in the Protestant head of English Church, the money goes to the king, not to the Pope. And there's a lot of money in that. Think of how much money people give at church, even modern society. Like, think of when you go to church with your family, should you go, and the collection bin comes around. It's not like you're putting like 50 cents in. You're usually putting a fair amount of money that, like, if everybody in the congregation puts $10 in, that's a lot of money at the end of a single mass session. If that money goes directly to your king as opposed to the head of the Catholic Church, well, it's very different, right? Anyway, while Shakespeare's growing up, he's reading these Greek plays. He's reading these Greek poems, some of which are fairly erotic. There are some that, you would probably read in a college classics course if you took them. And they refer to erotic acts between same-sex people. He would have not necessarily seen these as like lessons so much as both snippets of history and bits of art. Sexuality was also like, there's a difference between how things play out on like the public political sphere versus how things play out on anything else. So we're trying to instruct Mackenzie not to help with the videos. It's a daunting task. So when Shakespeare is kind of coming to prominence, he knows that the average person makes a lot of their daily decisions, right, based on their family. Younger people are making decisions based on like who they would like to be intimate with. Older people are making decisions on their kids, trying to get their kids to pick like good spouses. I mean, these are just normal everyday problems, right? How much of your day as a teenager is spent thinking about the person you have a crush on, trying to get a date with them, seeing how that works out? Like, how much of your passive self is put into that? That's just a human experience. Shakespeare knows about this. He knows that people want to joke about sexuality. He also understands the appeal of like low-class bawdy humor. One of my favorite things to do with Shakespeare plays is to point out all of these sort of, for lack of a better way of explaining it, like low-class, usually penis jokes or sex jokes in his plays. Like, he has these gorgeous upper level, you almost need an English degree to read them and appreciate them speeches, and then a penis joke, because he's Shakespeare and he understands how to appeal to people of all classes, low and high alike. His financial success is based on the fact that he has a lot of people coming to these plays of different backgrounds. So you could buy penny tickets to Shakespeare, penny seats. You would be standing room only. So like, imagine if you were in the pack on the carpet and that's how you were looking at the stage. Those were the penny seats. They would sell out in the theater. The Globe's a really amazing building to be in because they recreated the Globe to the specs, and you can still go down there and look at where the penny seats were. Shakespeare, to go back to the original question of is he bisexual or whatever, Shakespeare definitely had premarital relations with the woman he married because she was pregnant when they got married. Her name was Anne Hathaway. I've already made this joke in a different video. So they had Judith, fairly soon after they were married. I think only like 3 months after they were married. This was a fairly common occurrence in the early modern period. Men, for lack of a better, more tasteful way to say it, would kind of test drive their spouses. And if the woman got pregnant, they'd be like, good, we can make babies. Babies are good. Let's do this. A lot of people got married pregnant. Henry VIII got married pregnant. Queen Elizabeth was only born a few months after her parents got married. So it's not incredibly unusual to see that. What you want to think about with Shakespeare, though, was that he rampantly cheated on his wife, potentially with both men and women. It's not that they would have seen this as gay. They would have seen it as like, your male friends in this very Greek mindset are the only ones who can truly be intimate with your mind. They understand you. And if someone truly understands you, you naturally develop sort of a physical closeness to them. They wouldn't have necessarily gone about shaming people for their sexuality unless it became an issue. So there are certain things that get policed, certain things that get suggested away, and there are definitely evolutions of this over time. By the time we get to Oscar Wilde in the Victorian era, open sodomy is very, very frowned upon by Victorian society. Like, Oscar Wilde's pretty much as out and gay as you can get in a writer. He wrote a letter back home once talking about what it was like to kiss Walt Whitman, because Walt Whitman had a very big fluffy beard. And yet Oscar Wilde went to jail for sodomy for 3 years, hard labor. And his health was broken by it, and he was never the same again. In Shakespeare's time, if people, say, made enemies or became threats, some of this was used to justify other behaviors. So one potential example would be Anne Boleyn, Queen Elizabeth's mother. Obviously, the reason that we got the Catholic-Protestant divide, the reason Henry VIII leaves the Catholic Church in order to get her child to be a legitimate heir, and then it was Elizabeth, not a boy. If only he knew. If only he knew it was actually the best of the kids. Anyway, Anne Boleyn got pregnant again, but miscarried. And when the baby came out, it was fairly deformed. This is a natural occurrence, but also potentially caused by Henry. There's a lot of there's a lot of thought that he had something wrong with him in terms of venereal disease, and that it was affecting the children he was fathering. So, anyway, she had a deformed baby, and she miscarried, and this is bad news bears. You do not want to start miscarrying babies. You certainly don't want to have them coming out deformed, because now we're very concerned because we're obsessed with making more people, and we don't want them to exactly come out looking like the Jersey Devil. So her brother, she was really close with, who was, we generally think of him as fairly gay. Was married and stuff, but it seems from private correspondence that he potentially was much more interested in his male intimate acquaintances than his wife. They start saying that Elizabeth and her brother, or Anne Boleyn and her brother, are sleeping together because he's already sexually deviant, and we can start using this against him. Do they care when they don't need an excuse to, execute him and his sister? No. But when we need an excuse, it becomes a good one to have. When everything's fine and dandy, people will almost joke about it, and it's sort of like an open secret that, oh, so-and-so, you're going over to so-and-so's house, you better watch your son. It's not necessarily treated the way that you would potentially think it's treated, where it's like, oh, Shakespeare was gay. Shakespeare was probably messing around with a whole bunch of different people. His wife was usually fairly unhappy with how much time he spent in the city you know, going around to all kinds of different sorts of people. She was a bit jealous. But it was what it was. You also have to realize that in theater, in Shakespeare's time, the theater troupes were all male. There were no women actresses. It was not allowed. So in an interesting turn, so if you made it all the way here to the 20-minute mark of the video, you get some interesting history. Women were not allowed to be actors or actresses because of the amount of talking required of them and the fact that they might have to say something inappropriate. Like, think of what I said about Shakespeare making inappropriate jokes. Funny, bawdy, low humor jokes. If a woman had to say that, they would have seen it as carrying over to her even when she wasn't acting. Whereas men, they could kind of say things and we understood that they were acting and we didn't think it affected them privately, but women were not allowed to speak these words. Women were also not allowed to wear pants. This is really funny. So women could be arrested on prostitution charges if they were seen as talking too much, talking inappropriately, or wearing pants. Wearing pants was a prostitution charge. Shakespeare has a play called Twelfth Night where a twin brother and sister look identical, even though that doesn't usually happen in fraternal twins. They didn't understand how twins worked, so whatever. But he has a play where you have a twin brother and sister, and the sister thinks her brother dies in a boat crash. And in her grief and the fact that she's alone, she's like, I am going to pretend I'm my brother for the rest of my life. It'll A, make my life easier because I'll be a man, and B, I miss my brother. And the thing that we talk about when we talk about Twelfth Night is like the fact that Viola wears these pants all the time, because it would have been this shocking, horrid thing for a woman to be caught wearing pants. We actually have written accounts of women, and the arrest charge is like wearing man's clothing. So, fascinating. I was so tickled pink by that question that it got its very own video response. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for not commenting on my hair, for noticing that I always do the makeup for you, and for ignoring when my children interrupt our video. Have a great day, guys. See you soon.